Hello, my friends. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. As you know, we do this program, Spiritism, a closer look through Kardec Radio, and we are here every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Luiz Lima, and broadcasting from Orlando, I will be your host for tonight. Tonight, we are going to take a look at euthanasia. Euthanasia is one of these complicated and complex, I would say, topics in any society, in any group of people, because everybody has a different opinion. There is no consensus, so there is no common ground. It's basically your opinion against somebody else's opinion against mine, and so on and so on. So it's one of these topics in any society that is highly debated, argued, and so on. So let's take a initial look. Let's take an initial look at definitions. Let's see what we understand, how we understand euthanasia. So from Wikipedia, euthanasia is a practice of intentionally ending life to eliminate pain and suffering. Very simple, straightforward definition. Definition from the Webster's Dictionary. The act or practice of killing or permitting the death of hopeless, sick, or injured individuals in a relatively painless way for reasons of mercy. So, according to the two definitions, tell us about mercy, eliminate pain and suffering. However, on the second definition from the Webster Dictionary, there's a second layer, which is not only killing, but permitting the death. So you see, there are different definitions, different layers of definition. For us, regardless, it has to do with abbreviating somebody's life. And this is, for us, Spiritists, not right. It's just not right. Nobody's supposed to take anybody's life in any way. Now, in order to define what is euthanasia and what is not, because that's where the problem is. In order to define this is euthanasia and this is not, we need to define the end of life, where life ends. Because if you act upon the person, the body, whatever, before what we consider the end of life, it is euthanasia. If it's after that, it's not. Not everybody sees the end of life. Not everybody envisions end of life being at the same point in time. That makes things even more complicated. Spiritism has a very clear definition, which we're going to be talking about later. Very clear definition of what end of life is. Very clear. And if we have a very clear definition, there is no longer the idea of right or wrong. It is or it isn't. I'm right, you're wrong, and the other person thinks the other way around. There is no such a thing anymore if you have a clear definition. So I see Christina is following us here tonight. Good night, Christina. Thanks for joining us. So let's keep going here. And why is there such a thing as euthanasia in our society, in countries? Why? Several reasons, different reasons. One of them, medical reasons. For example, somebody is really, signaling the end of life in a hospital or something. The medical team, right, the nurses and medical doctors, and so they know it's happening, and out of compassion, because they think they're doing a good thing, to avoid and prolonging the suffering of that person. So in order to, not let them suffer any longer, they will consider, and at times do, perform the euthanasia. So medical reasons is one of the, we're not saying right or wrong so far. We are just enumerating reasons why euthanasia, happens. So number one, medical reasons. Number two, for example, a person in a vegetative state or condition that we can't tell if the person is still conscient, if conscience is even a thing taking place in the event. So, yeah, euthanasia is considered. Number three, another reason, legal reasons. What do I mean by legal reasons? Let's say, for example, somebody is dying, it's about to die, and a lot of people, and we can see this throughout history, a lot of people, when they are feeling they are about to die, they just let out secrets and things they never had the courage, or they were never urged to be able to say, to do. So they will do things like this to end their life to their ability in peace. So I said what I did, I admitted I did, and that's it. The problem is, by letting secrets come out at deathbed, it can be, it has implications. So you could put somebody in prison, for example, or in trouble with the law. So that's why I call legal reasons. In order to avoid this, the person who's going to go to prison, if the secret is let out, will just go there and perform euthanasia. Number four, another one, financial benefit. If that person dies, I inherit some money, life insurance, whatever it is. So I rather just make it happen faster because it's going to happen anyway. So let me just, abbreviate the whole thing. Financial benefit. Enemies. Enemies. Person is dying. You just hate that person. You want revenge, and that's your time for cutting off their person's life. Another one, somebody's dying, and others who are not really friendly with that person, they just think that it's a useless person, a worthless life, and they will just take it down. So there are different reasons. None of them are right because taking somebody's life is wrong, period. But these are different reasons why euthanasia is part of our society, unfortunately, because it's a fact of life. It does happen. Euthanasia is always, no exception, is always a form of homicide. Always. It's a form of homicide. And if it is so, there are going to be the person who performs euthanasia will be held responsible. Will be held responsible in their trials in the spiritual realm later on. They will have to deal with the fact that they performed such a thing. Now, what is complicated, as I said in the beginning, is to define where life ends. So let's take a look throughout history of definitions of when life ends. When do you pronounce somebody dead? So let's just go back to the caveman times, several thousand years ago. Somebody's in the group. That somebody, let's say the guy just falls down and, just like on the floor, looks like this guy is sleeping and he won't move at all. When do you consider that this guy is dead? Well, it depends. Some people will say, well, let's wait until tomorrow. If he doesn't wake up, then he's dead. Some other people say, no, 1 day is not enough. Let's wait 2 days. Some other people say it's not necessary to wait that long. In 1 hour, if he doesn't move, he's dead. So you see, there's no criteria. There's no black and white criteria. So this is not looking at the person and waiting for the person to move or not. Is not a good criteria to define the moment of death. Later on in time, we found out that there's such a thing as heartbeat. We're still in the caveman times, all the way back in the past. So when somebody, just falls on the floor. Now it's all, it won't move. So what we can do is put our ear towards the chest of that person and see if we hear a heartbeat. So if you hear those tum, 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 you know the person is alive. When you don't hear anymore, for you, that person is dead. And then you tell your colleagues around, no, this guy is dead. Somebody else will come over and say, let me check myself. So they put their ear against the chest of the presumed dead person, and they will say, no, but I still hear very, 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 a low noise, but I still hear the beat. So that's not a black and white form of stating the person is dead, because it depends on the ability that each one of us have on our ears. Some people hear more than others. Depends on the environment. You can have a lot of noise in the environment around. So it's not a good criteria. Then later on with time, we invented something much, much, much better and precise, supposedly the stethoscope. Stethoscope, you put it's the same thing as putting the ear on the chest, but it's not really the ear. It's an instrument that has a lot more, it captures sound in a much more, I would say, accurate way. But still, it depends on the ability of the ears of the person who's got the stethoscope. I can say, yeah, I still hear it. I still hear the stethoscope is on the guy's chest. And I'll say, at one point, I'll say, stop. That's it. This guy's dead. Somebody else picks the same stethoscope and they will say, no, but I still hear it. So it's not a good criteria. We can't use that to define death. Later on with time, we found out that we can use technology to attach our knowledge to the medical field. Then we invented the electrocardiogram, ECG, in which it's still the same thing. You're still looking for heartbeat. However, you're not, the organ that you sense, or this sensory organ that you're going to use to see if the guy's dead, is no longer your ears on the chest. It's your vision on a piece of paper, and a pen will start making movements. When the movements stop, when you don't see it, now you're using your ears, when you don't see the movements anymore, you say this guy's dead. Then somebody else comes in and has a much more accurate, for example, vision 2020. You will say, no, but the thing is still moving a little bit, but it's still moving. So it's not a good criteria, because it depends on the person who is watching the pen on the paper. Then later on, we invented the electroencephalogram, EEG. That's much more precise in terms of, we found out that even when the heart stops beating, the brain is still working. The brain is still generating activity. So instead of putting the electrodes on the chest, we are going to put the electrodes on the head to pick up brain activity. That's what an EEG exam is. But still, you depend on the pen moving on a piece of paper or on a screen. And some people will say, it still moves, I don't see, and I see, and you don't see well, and I see better than you do. It's still not a criteria. And then we found out that it's not only the brain in general, parts of the brain. You have to consider the entire encephalic system. And that's where we are today. For you to write a death certificate, the criteria is encephalic death. That's it. When there's no activity whatsoever on the monitor, is flatlined, that's it. Then you can sign off on a death certificate. Then you're ready to do this. There's no activity. So let's start, the process of, taking the body out and taking somewhere else. And so then suddenly the guy wakes up, comes back, start talking, and say, oh, I see this, I saw this happening. The medical doctor told this to the nurse, and the nurse told this to the anesthetist, and the lights went this way and that way, and you did this, and you were wearing such a cloth. Unbelievable. It's called near-death experience. So what was this whole thing about writing the death certificate after encephalic death? NDE, near-death experience, destroys that idea. The concept of NDE destroys the idea of encephalic death. So what do we do in terms of the medical profession? What do we do? You see, that's where things get complicated, because for all purposes, we go by what science says. And science says it's encephalic death, but not necessarily. Science can no longer see a point further in time where the person would still be alive, and then there's a point beyond that encephalic death that is the point. That is where the death certificate can be written. There is no such a thing. Spiritism explains that very easily. The spirit undergoes suffering and pain to offset the wrongdoings of the past. That's why we all in life, we suffer and we feel pain, moral pain, because of the wrongdoings of the past. So we are here to offset. Death or dying, the dying process, is part of the offset. Infirmities are part of the cure of the soul. So if the process is still ongoing, so if the offset process is interrupted, what happens to the dying person? The spirit did not have the opportunity to finish that off. So you will have to go through the same thing again on a future life, on a future opportunity. Is it fun? No. You see, it's like infirmities are part of the cure. So if I tell you, for example, oh man, I got a big headache. I'm gonna take a pill, and you take away my pill. So you're not letting me have the opportunity to work on that. So the spirit that was about to finish its offsetting process will not have that chance because somebody performed euthanasia before he could finish that. So those performing euthanasia at any level, crime, legal, enemies, medical, those performing euthanasia will be held responsible for terminating a person's life. Besides, there's more. How about the discarnate spirit? He might revolt and come after the person who performed the euthanasia in spirit. He might become the enemy now. Because by doing euthanasia, the disincarnation process was much more difficult, much more painful than all the pain the person had to go through in the first time. The discarnation process is also part of the learning experience for that spirit. So euthanasia prevents that learning from taking place, as it should. So the spirit that discarnate under these conditions might revolt and become an obsessor. In this book here, Workers of the Life Eternal, there is a story, a very interesting story, which I mentioned here before on our program. It's a discarnation of a guy. His name is Joaquin Cavalcante. This guy, in his younger days, he was married, happily married, and he was always going to church and so and so. So at one point, he decided that he was going to live his life for the church. So he abandoned his wife. Of course, she didn't like it, and he became this 100% of the time worker for the great cause of Jesus, charity work and all of that, fraternity and so on. So he became very close with one of the priests for many, 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 many years. They were very close friends. Towards the end of his life, he had a lot of trouble with his digestive system, so he had to undergo several surgeries. And in the surgery that we thought it was going to be the last, at least from the medical point of view, he was like, "This is our last shot because whatever we as doctors and nurses could do, we have done. So now it's maybe your last shot." So he goes into the hospital for the surgery. He undergoes the surgery, and he's very weak, but he is not letting go. So he tells the doctor, "I want to talk to my friend priest. Please bring him in." They bring the priest in, and the doctor says he's very weak. We are considering euthanasia. They call compassive injection. So we are considering this because he's suffering a great deal and he's not going to come back. That's it. His body won't make it. So, the priest, his friend, said, "Well, let me talk to him." So he goes talk to Joachim, and Joachim said, "Listen, when I joined the church many decades ago, I just abandoned my wife. And this thing has been in my mind since that day. I feel extremely guilty. Please bring her in here because I want to get her, I want to forgive. I want forgiveness. So I want to talk to her, bring her in." So, the priest starts talking about other things and not going straight into the subject. He didn't know his wife had died many years before. So he's waiting. He's waiting for his wife to show up. He's hanging on as he could. Not that he was this materialistic person, exactly the other way around, but he was holding on to his material body like crazy. So the spirit, Andre Luis, discarnate spirit, is in there. He is part of a group that will help spirits discarnate, especially those who ahead of time, it is known that's going to be a difficult process for the dying person. So he's in there to help, the group is there to help Joachim to discarnate. And then when they hear the doctor says about the compassive injection, they say, "We need to do something because he is hanging on. He's suffering a great deal, even more than before, because he's waiting for his wife to arrive. She's not going to arrive because she's dead." So the team, the spiritual team, what they decide to do is perform cuts in certain parts of the intestine. So he would bleed because of those cuts and he would defy a little more. When that's the general idea. When this happens, he will be less able per se. It's going to be a lot more difficult for him to hang on. So he's going to expand his perispirit. He's going to, detach a little bit more. So we can bring her, and he's going to be closer to the spirit world. And then we bring his wife in. He gets his forgiveness in spirit, but he won't be able to tell. And then he will come back, and then he can go, because supposedly, for all purposes, he was excused by his wife. Well, that's the idea. So when he gets worse, because the spiritual team makes these cuts in the intestine, he really gets worse, which is the objective. So the doctors say, now it's time for the compassive injection. He applies, he gives the injection. Well, that demonstrates the problem, because he was not dead. And what is death for Spiritism? Is when the perispirit disconnects from the body. At that point, such a thing had not yet happened. The perispirit was still connected to the body. So it was euthanasia. Yes, compassive. I'm not going to say the doctor was a bad guy. That's not the point. That's beside the point. But yes, he still had the perispirit attached. So it was euthanasia. And when that happens, because it was something that he wasn't ready for it, his spirit now has a lot of trouble and can no longer control the cells in the body. So he suffers as a spirit a lot more. And from that point on, which should take him maybe 5 or 10 minutes to die for good, it took him 20 hours. So it's a nice story. And the book has other stories like this. It illustrates the inability that we have to know when life ends. Why? Because again, the black and white definition of Spiritism: life ends when the perispirit disconnects from the body. Next question: how do I know? Answer: we don't. We would have to have equipment, technology, some sort of exam, a lab exam or something, whatever, a scan or some sort of super MRI that detects the connection or not between the perispirit and the body. That would be the only way to perform things right. So we have to kind of risk. Let's take a risk. This person can be in a vegetative state, and the perispirit might be disconnected. You're taking a risk because you don't know. Now, there are a few cases where the person does not tolerate the suffering anymore, and they ask for euthanasia. So they ask family members, medical team, just apply the compassive injection. By Spiritism definition of euthanasia and end of life, this is suicide. This is suicide. So suicide doesn't mean you have to be in your 20s or 30s and 40s. No, you can be 3 minutes or 3 seconds away from getting the perispirit disconnected. If you end life before that, it's still euthanasia. If you ask that for yourself, suicide. So the spirit that asks for euthanasia for himself, herself, will bear responsibility just as much as if he had committed suicide as a person who goes to the top of the building and just jumps. It's the same thing from the spiritual point of view. There are moral consequences for those who perform euthanasia, regardless of their intentions. Because euthanasia equals taking lives. Taking lives from the eyes of God is criminal, regardless of country, law, anything else. Thank you so very much for participating with us tonight. Spiritism: A Closer Look will be back here on Kardec Radio next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you very much. Be well.